Hi kids, Uncle Gabe here. Hope you had a really good start to your new school term. Just want to say that I really miss seeing all of you. Usually in June, we take a break for Planet Faith, but these are not usual times. I wanted to take this month of June to think about one very important topic: church. So for the past few months, we've been meeting online. We've not been meeting on Sunday. The sermon is now on YouTube and Planet Faith is now on Google Slides. Some of you might have some questions. Is this another way to do church? What is church anyway? Why do we do certain things in church like sing songs, read the Bible, listen to a sermon? Who decides? So for the month of June, we'll be thinking about church. But what is church? That's the question that I want to answer today. But first, let me ask you a question. What is the first thing you think of when you hear the word church? Pause this video right now and discuss with your parents this question. Cool. Have you discussed the question with your parents? What do you think of when I say the word church? Well, here are some answers out there. Some people think that church is a place. It's a building that you go to every Sunday to meet your church friends and sing to God. Some people think that church is a club. It's a group that you go to find your friends and just enjoy each other's company, to have fun. To find out what church is, we need to see how the Bible uses the word. Now listen up, your parents have a few questions for you later, it's based on what I'm going to be telling you. See, the word church comes from the Greek word ecclesia. Okay, Gabe, but what does ecclesia mean? Well, the word ecclesia means gathering. The word ecclesia is used in two ways. There are two possible meanings. The word ecclesia can mean God's people all around the world. Now, for example, here's what Jesus says to Peter in Matthew chapter 16 verse 18. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, my ecclesia. So you and I are part of the global church. We're part of God's people everywhere, all around the world. The second way that the Bible uses the word ecclesia or church, it can also mean God's people gathering physically to worship God. So what is the church? The word church has two meanings in the Bible, two main meanings. The church is God's people all around the world, and the church is God's people gathering physically to worship God. Another way people have described these two uses of the word church is the invisible church, right? God's people everywhere, which you can't see, and the visible church, God's people gathering on a Sunday, which you can see. That's why they call it the visible church. So what does this mean for you? These two meanings of church, what does it mean for you? I think there are at least three lessons for us. Lesson number one, the church is God's people. It's not a place, it's not a club. You know, sometimes we talk about church like a building, and in Singapore there are many nice church buildings, but the building is not what makes the church, right? It's God's people gathering to worship Him every week that makes a church. And sometimes we talk about church like a club. Like, I join my friends in church to play football or play board games or to play Minecraft. Well, yes, these are some fun things that we do with our church friends, but that's not what makes a church. It's important to think rightly about what church is. The church is not a place. The church is not a club. The church is God's people. Here's the second lesson about church. Gathering as God's people to worship God is very important. It's really important to gather to meet as a church physically. When we gather together to worship God, we are giving the world a preview of what God's coming kingdom will be like. When Jesus comes back, everyone will be worshiping and praising God together. Everyone will be loving God and loving each other. What happens on a Sunday is a picture of what will happen when Jesus comes back. And so what we're doing now in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, what we're doing now, meeting online, watching a sermon on YouTube, it's not church. We cannot show the world what God's kingdom is like if we don't meet physically and visibly. That is why the Bible says meeting together is so important. So look forward to the time where we can meet physically again and ask God for His help for this to happen as soon as possible. This is why the Bible says this in Hebrews chapter 10. Let me read it for us. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 24 says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." The day is another way of saying the coming day of Jesus coming back. Here's the third and final lesson. Just because you go to church doesn't mean you're part of the church. Let me say that again. Just because you go to church doesn't mean that you're part of the church. Remember, the church is a people, God's people. And God's people are those who trust and follow Jesus. Well, this means that someone who just goes to a Sunday church meeting but doesn't really trust and follow Jesus, well, this person is not part of the church. So here's a very important question for you. Do you trust Jesus? Do you trust Jesus? Because this is what makes you part of the church. God's people. Just because you go every Sunday or you listen to a sermon, but if you don't trust Jesus, then you're not part of the church. So do you trust Jesus? Would you like to be part of God's family, the church? If not, what's stopping you from being part of God's people, His family? And if you have any questions that's stopping you from being part of the church, you can ask your parents or you can ask me. Well, it's time to end. Now, just want to summarize. We learned two things today. The church can mean two things in the Bible. It can mean the invisible church, right? God's people all around the world. Or it could mean the visible church. God's people gathered physically to worship God. We will always be the invisible church. We're all part of God's people all around the world. But right now, we are not able to be the visible church. So would you pray that we can gather physically again so that we can give people a picture of what things will be like when Jesus returns? But here's another question. What should we do when we gather for church? And that's what we'll be looking at in the next 3 weeks. Take care, kids. Your parents have a few questions for you, so do listen, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.